London, 1845. The light from 100 candles reflected off the crystal chandeliers of Thornfield Hall, casting a golden glow over the ballroom. Lady Rosalind Abernathy stood at the perimeter of the grand space, her gloved fingers tightly gripping her dance card as she observed the swirling couples before her. At 25, she had long resigned herself to the role of wallflower, content to watch rather than participate in the elaborate social rituals of the London season. You might consider actually dancing, rather than merely clutching that card as though it were a talisman, came the familiar voice of her cousin and companion, Lady Helena Fairchild. Rosalind glanced down at the pristine dance card, unmarked save for the obligatory opening set with her cousin's husband. "I find observation far more illuminating than participation," she replied with a small smile. "Besides, who would ask a woman of my circumstances to dance? I am neither young enough to be fresh, nor wealthy enough to be desirable." Helena sighed. "You persist in this melancholy view despite evidence to the contrary. I've noticed at least 3 gentlemen looking in your direction this evening." "Curiosity, not interest," Rosalind corrected. "They wonder at the audacity of the disgraced daughter of the late Earl of Milford daring to show her face in polite society." 5 years had passed since the scandal that had destroyed her family, yet the whispers still followed her. Her father's suicide after his financial ruin had left a stain no amount of time seemed capable of washing away. The modest inheritance from her maternal grandmother had saved Rosalind from destitution, but could not restore what mattered most, her place in society and the respect of her peers. Helena placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Not everyone judges you for your father's mistakes." "Perhaps not everyone," Rosalind conceded, "but enough that I shall never make a suitable match. I have accepted my fate, Helena." "You should too." Love and marriage were luxuries reserved for those untainted by scandal, those with fortune and status intact. Rosalind had neither. Her only goal now was to maintain the small dignity she had left, and perhaps, in time, establish herself as a respectable companion to some elderly lady of quality. Romance existed only in the novels she read late at night, a fantasy as unattainable as the stars. The orchestra struck up a new melody, signaling the beginning of a waltz. Rosalind instinctively drew back further into the shadows, knowing that during this most intimate of dances, her solitude would be most noticeable. Across the ballroom, through the press of silk gowns and formal black evening wear, a pair of eyes found her. Percy Trentham, the 7th Duke of Westmoreland, stood among a cluster of aristocrats, barely listening to Lord Hastings' tedious commentary on horse breeding. His attention had been captured by a vision in pale blue silk, standing apart from the revelry with an air of quiet dignity that struck him more forcefully than the practiced coquetry of the debutantes vying for his attention. "Westmoreland, are you attending?" Lord Hastings asked, a note of irritation in his voice. "Forgive me," the Duke replied, still watching the woman across the room. "Who is that lady in blue standing near the eastern archway?" Lord Hastings followed his gaze and frowned. "Lady Rosalind Abernathy, daughter of the late Earl of Milford. Surely you recall the scandal. Her father gambled away their fortune and took his own life rather than face his creditors. Dreadful business." "I was abroad during that time," Percy said, recalling vague mentions of the affair in letters from his mother. "Consider yourself fortunate to have missed it," Hastings continued. "The Tuns spoke of nothing else for months. The girl has been living in reduced circumstances with her cousin's family ever since. A pity, really. Before the scandal, she was considered quite the catch, accomplished, well-bred, and with a respectable dowry. Now she's just another cautionary tale." Percy barely heard the man's final words. There was something in Lady Rosalind's posture, a blend of vulnerability and resilience, that called to him in a way he could not explain. At 32, after 10 years as Duke, he had grown weary of fortune hunters and ambitious mamas parading their daughters before him. Lady Rosalind, by contrast, seemed to seek nothing from the gathering, content in her solitude. "Excuse me," Percy said abruptly, cutting off Hastings mid-sentence. He moved across the ballroom with purpose, ignoring the speculative glances that followed him. As he approached Lady Rosalind, he saw her eyes widen in recognition, not of him personally, but of his rank. The small step backward she took spoke volumes about her expectation of judgment rather than courtesy. "Lady Rosalind Abernathy," he said, with a formal bow, "I am Westmoreland. Would you do me the honor of this dance?" Rosalind froze, certain she had misheard. The Duke of Westmoreland, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in England, could not possibly be asking her to dance. It had to be some cruel jest. "Your Grace," she managed, executing a perfect curtsy despite her shock, "I fear you may have mistaken me for someone else." A smile touched his lips, transforming his austere features into something unexpectedly warm. "I assure you, Lady Rosalind, I am quite certain of whom I address. The waltz awaits. Will you join me?" Aware of the curious gazes now fixed upon them, Rosalind hesitated. To refuse would be unthinkable, yet to accept meant placing herself at the center of attention, precisely where she had worked so hard not to be. "I would be honored, Your Grace," she said finally, placing her gloved hand in his. As he led her onto the dance floor, the whispers began. Rosalind could almost hear the speculation. Why would the Duke of Westmoreland single out the disgraced daughter of a ruined earl? What could he possibly want from her? The same questions echoed in her own mind as his hand came to rest at her waist, the proper distance maintained between them as they began to move to the music. "You seem troubled, Lady Rosalind," Percy observed, guiding her smoothly through the steps of the waltz. "Merely surprised, Your Grace," she replied, careful to keep her expression neutral. "I rarely dance these days." "A shame. You move with exceptional grace." "You flatter me unnecessarily, sir." His dark eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "I assure you, Lady Rosalind, I never say anything unnecessarily." They completed a turn, and Rosalind became acutely aware of the stares following them. "Your choice of partner has caused quite a stir," she noted, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. "I fear your reputation may suffer by association." Percy's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "My reputation can withstand far more than a waltz with a lady of impeccable breeding." "Breeding, perhaps, but not circumstances," she countered. "I am no longer the person I was before my father's disgrace." "And who are you now?" The question, asked with such genuine curiosity, caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in years. Everyone simply assumed they knew all there was to know about Lady Rosalind Abernathy, victim of her father's folly. "I am a woman who has learned the value of caution," she said finally, "and the danger of expectations." The music was drawing to a close, and Rosalind felt a curious reluctance to have the dance end. For 3 minutes, she had been the focus of the Duke of Westmoreland's undivided attention, an experience both unsettling and oddly exhilarating. As the final notes faded, Percy held her gaze for a moment longer than propriety dictated. "Thank you for the dance, Lady Rosalind. I hope we shall have the opportunity to speak again." He returned her to Helena's side with a formal bow, then disappeared into the crowd, leaving Rosalind to face her cousin's astonished expression. "Did the Duke of Westmoreland truly just waltz with you?" Helena whispered, gripping Rosalind's arm. "The man who has refused to stand up with the season's most eligible ladies." "It was merely a dance," Rosalind said, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. Nothing more than a momentary curiosity on his part. Yet as the evening progressed, she found the Duke's eyes returning to her repeatedly across the crowded ballroom, and each time their gazes met, something indefinable passed between them. A recognition, perhaps, or a question neither could articulate. By the time Rosalind departed the ball with her cousins, She had convinced herself that nothing would come of the encounter. The Duke's interest, whatever its nature, would surely fade in the light of day. Men of his station did not form attachments to women of compromised circumstances, no matter how intriguing they might find them for a single evening. It was a belief she held firmly, until the following afternoon, when the butler presented her with a calling card bearing the name of His Grace, the Duke of Westmoreland. "The Duke requests a moment of your time, my lady," the butler informed her, his normally impassive face betraying a hint of curiosity. Rosalind stared at the card in her hand, its engraved lettering seeming to mock her certainty that last night had been nothing more than a passing fancy. "Please show His Grace to the blue drawing-room," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I shall join him momentarily." As the butler withdrew, Helena entered the morning room, her expression alight with excitement. "Is it true? The Duke is calling on you." "It appears so," Rosalind replied, smoothing her plain morning dress and wishing she had worn something more becoming, "though I cannot imagine why." Helena clasped her hands. "Perhaps he found you as enchanting as I always say you are. More likely he has some business matter to discuss regarding my father's estate," Rosalind reasoned, though she knew of no possible connection between the Duke and her family's affairs. "I should not keep him waiting." Taking a steadying breath, she made her way to the blue drawing-room where Percy Trentham stood by the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon light. He turned at her entrance, and Rosalind was struck anew by his commanding presence. The Duke of Westmoreland was not conventionally handsome. His features were too strong, his gaze too intense for that, but there was something compelling in his countenance that demanded attention. "Lady Rosalind," he said, bowing, "thank you for receiving me." "Your Grace," she curtsied, "this is an unexpected honor." A slight smile curved his lips. "Is it? I believe I mentioned my hope that we would speak again." "I confess I did not expect such promptness in fulfilling that hope," she replied, gesturing for him to be seated as she took her own place on a nearby settee. Percy remained standing. "I have never seen the virtue in delay when one's mind is decided." "And what has your mind decided, Your Grace?" Rosalind asked, her voice carefully controlled despite the sudden acceleration of her heartbeat. "That I should like to know you better," he said simply. "I find myself intrigued by your composure last night, your dignity in the face of what must have been uncomfortable scrutiny." Rosalind clasped her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. "You are direct, sir." "I value honesty above social niceties, Lady Rosalind, a habit that often dismays my mother but serves me well in most matters." "Then I shall be equally direct," she responded, lifting her chin. "I am puzzled by your interest. A man of your position has countless more suitable companions available to him." "Suitable by whose measure?" he countered. "I find that society's definition of suitability rarely aligns with my own." There was something refreshing in his frankness, so at odds with the careful dissembling Rosalind had grown accustomed to in her reduced circumstances. Still, she could not allow herself to be swayed by it. "Your Grace, while I am flattered by your attention, I must caution you that any association with me carries certain disadvantages." "My father's disgrace." "Is your father's," he interrupted, "not yours. I make my judgments based on the individual before me, not on circumstances beyond their control." Rosalind shook her head. "A noble sentiment, but one the tongue does not share. Already there will be talk about your dance with me last night. This call will only fuel the speculation." Percy moved closer, his expression earnest. "Let them speculate. I did not return to England after 10 years abroad to live according to society's narrow expectations." 10 years, Rosalind echoed, seizing on this new information. "Where were you?" "India, primarily," he replied. "My father believed that managing our interests there would prepare me for my eventual duties as Duke. I returned only when his health began to fail 3 years ago." Understanding dawned. That explains why you don't seem fully acclimated to London society's strictures. A genuine laugh escaped him, the sound warming the formal room. Am I so transparent? My mother regularly despairs of my colonial manners, as she calls them. Not transparent, Rosalind corrected, finding herself smiling in return. Merely different from what one expects of an English duke. And is that difference unwelcome? The question hung between them, weighted with meaning beyond the simple words. Rosalind hesitated, knowing that her answer might determine the course of whatever this unexpected connection between them might become. No, she said softly, not unwelcome, merely unfamiliar. Percy's expression softened, and he took a seat at last, though not before moving his chair slightly closer to her settee than convention dictated. Then perhaps you might permit me to make it more familiar, he suggested. Would you do me the honor of driving with me in the park tomorrow afternoon? I have acquired a new pair of greys that I'm eager to show off, and I can think of no better companion with whom to do so. A public drive in the park with the Duke of Westmoreland would make it clear to all of London that he had singled her out for his attention. It would place her once again in the spotlight she had so carefully avoided for 5 years, yet Rosalind found herself nodding. I should like that very much, Your Grace. Percy, he said, when we are not in formal company, I would be honored if you would use my given name. That would be most improper, she protested, though without much conviction. His eyes, dark and intent, held hers. I suspect, Lady Rosalind, that we may find many of society's notions of propriety unnecessarily constraining in the days to come. The implied intimacy of his words, the suggestion that there would be days to come in which they would share each other's company, sent a thrill of both excitement and apprehension through Rosalind. She knew she should resist whatever this was that seemed to be developing between them. Nothing good could come of encouraging the attention of a duke, not for a woman in her position. Yet as Percy rose to take his leave, pressing her hand briefly to his lips in a gesture that lingered just long enough to be noticed, Rosalind found herself unable to summon the necessary caution. For the first time in 5 years, she felt seen not as the daughter of a disgraced earl, but as herself, a woman worthy of interest and attention. It was a dangerous feeling, she knew. One that could lead only to disappointment when the Duke inevitably realized the social cost of his fascination with her. But for now, for this moment, Rosalind allowed herself to savor the warmth that spread through her at his parting smile and the promise it held. Until tomorrow, Lady Rosalind. Until tomorrow, Percy. His name felt foreign on her tongue, yet somehow right. As the door closed behind him, Rosalind remained seated, her mind awhirl with possibilities she had long since forbidden herself to contemplate. Hope, that most treacherous of emotions, had awakened in her heart, and though she knew it was folly, she could not bring herself to extinguish it just yet. The following day dawned clear and mild, perfect weather for a drive in Hyde Park. Rosalind spent an uncharacteristic amount of time selecting her attire, finally settling on a walking dress of deep emerald that Helena insisted brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. A matching bonnet, trimmed with a single ostrich feather, completed the ensemble. You look positively radiant, Helena declared, as Rosalind descended the stairs at precisely the appointed hour. The Duke will be utterly enchanted. He is already inexplicably interested, Rosalind replied, attempting to temper her cousin's enthusiasm. Let us not ascribe deeper emotions to what is likely mere curiosity. Helena adjusted the angle of Rosalind's bonnet. Curiosity does not drive a man of his station to call on a lady the very day after meeting her, nor to invite her for a public drive during the fashionable hour. She stepped back, satisfied with her handiwork. Mark my words, cousin, the Duke of Westmoreland has intentions. Before Rosalind could form a suitable response, the butler appeared to announce that his Grace's carriage had arrived. Taking a steadying breath, she allowed herself to be escorted to the entrance, where Percy stood waiting beside a magnificent phaeton drawn by two perfectly matched grey horses. He was dressed more casually than at the ball, in a dark green driving coat that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. As Rosalind approached, his expression brightened in a way that made her heart skip. "Lady Rosalind," he greeted her, taking her gloved hand. "You look enchanting. I see we are of one mind regarding colour today." Rosalind glanced between their similarly hued attire and smiled. "A fortunate coincidence, Your Grace." "Percy," he reminded her in a low voice, helping her into the high seat of the phaeton with strong, sure hands. Once she was settled, he took his place beside her and gathered the reins. The horses moved forward with a smooth motion that spoke of their excellent training and their driver's skill. "They're beautiful animals," Rosalind observed as they turned toward Hyde Park. "Hanoverian stock." Percy glanced at her with evident surprise. "You know horses." "My father kept an excellent stable before," she trailed off, then continued more firmly. "I used to ride almost daily. It's one of the things I miss most about my former life." "You don't ride now." "My cousin's mount is elderly and suitable only for the most sedate of outings," she explained. "And I have no horse of my own." Percy's hands tightened on the reins. "That is easily remedied." "I beg your pardon. I have several suitable mares at my London stable," he said casually. "I would be honored if you would accept the loan of one during the season, for morning rides, perhaps." Rosalind stared at him, momentarily speechless. "Your Grace, Percy, I couldn't possibly accept such an offer. It would be most improper." "Why?" he challenged. "Is it improper for one friend to lend another the means to enjoy a favorite pastime?" "Friends," she repeated. "Is that what we are?" His dark eyes met hers. "I hope we are becoming so. Unless you object." There was something in his direct gaze that made prevarication impossible. "I don't object," Rosalind admitted, "but I wonder at the wisdom of it. Friendship between us is likely to cause you inconvenience and me pain when society inevitably forces us to acknowledge the unsuitability of the connection." They had reached Hyde Park, and Percy slowed the horses to a pace better suited for conversation. "You speak as though our fates are predetermined," he observed, "as though society's judgment is the final arbiter of what is possible between two people." "Isn't it?" Rosalind countered. "You may have the luxury of defying convention, but I assure you I do not. Every action I take is scrutinized through the lens of my father's disgrace." "And yet you agreed to drive with me today." "Perhaps I am not as wise as I pretend to be," she confessed, her voice softening. Percy's answering smile transformed his features, revealing a warmth that few were privileged to see beneath his typically reserved demeanor. "Or perhaps you recognize, as I do, that there are some connections worth pursuing regardless of external opinions." As they entered the fashionable circuit of the park, Rosalind became acutely aware of the attention their appearance together was attracting. Heads turned as they passed, conversations paused mid-sentence, lorgnettes were raised for a better view of the scandalous sight, the Duke of Westmoreland openly displaying his interest in the disgraced Lady Rosalind Abernathy. "Everyone is staring," she murmured, resisting the urge to shrink into her seat. "Let them," Percy replied, seeming entirely unbothered by the scrutiny. "Perhaps it will give them something worthwhile to discuss for a change, rather than the usual tedious gossip about hemlines and political appointments." Despite her anxiety, Rosalind found herself smiling at his dismissive attitude. "You truly don't care what they think, do you?" "I care about the opinions of those who matter to me," he corrected. "The rest is merely noise." They completed one circuit of the park, then another, their conversation flowing with surprising ease from horses to books to Percy's experiences in India. Rosalind found herself laughing more freely than she had in years, entranced by his descriptions of ancient temples and vibrant markets, so different from the rigid confines of London society. "You miss it," she observed as he described a sunrise over the Ganges with particular vividness. "India, I mean." Percy nodded, his expression turning contemplative. "Parts of it, yes. There's a freedom there that England lacks, a sense that a person can become more than what their birth dictated." "How strange," Rosalind mused, "to think of a duke finding freedom in relinquishing the advantages of his position." "Not relinquishing," he corrected. "Merely setting aside temporarily. I always knew I would return to my responsibilities here." His hands, steady on the reins, tightened almost imperceptibly, but I learned that duty need not preclude personal fulfillment. There was something in the way he spoke those words, a quiet intensity that suggested deeper meaning, that caused Rosalind's heart to beat faster. She was saved from having to formulate a response by their encounter with another carriage, this one containing the formidable Dowager Countess of Harrington and her daughter. "Lady Harrington," Percy acknowledged with a nod as their vehicles slowed to a stop alongside each other. The dowager's gaze moved from him to Rosalind, her expression a study in barely concealed disapproval. "Your Grace, this is an unexpected pleasure." "And Lady Rosalind, how interesting to see you in the park during the fashionable hour. I had thought you preferred more discreet outings." The subtle barb was not lost on either of them. Rosalind forced a polite smile. "The fine weather proved too tempting to resist, my lady." "Indeed," the dowager replied, her tone suggesting she found this explanation inadequate. She turned her attention back to Percy. "We missed you at Lady Pembroke's musical evening yesterday, Your Grace. Several young ladies expressed particular disappointment at your absence." "I had a prior commitment," Percy replied smoothly. "But please convey my regrets to Lady Pembroke." "I shall," Lady Harrington assured him, her gaze lingering pointedly on Rosalind, "though I suspect she would prefer to hear them directly, perhaps at her ball next week. Miss Harrington and I would be delighted to save you a dance." The blatant matchmaking attempt hung awkwardly in the air. Before Percy could respond, Rosalind gently touched his arm. "We should not delay Lady Harrington any longer," she suggested quietly. "I'm certain she has many calls to make." Percy nodded, his expression unreadable. "Good day, Lady Harrington, Miss Harrington. Enjoy the remainder of your outing." As they pulled away, Rosalind exhaled slowly. "And so it begins," she murmured. "What begins?" "The campaign to remind you of your position and the many eligible young ladies who would make far more suitable companions than I," she explained. "Lady Harrington is merely the first of many who will feel it their duty to direct your attention more appropriately." Percy's jaw tightened. "They waste their efforts." "I am not a green boy to be swayed by society's expectations." "Perhaps not," Rosalind conceded, "but they are relentless, and their approval matters in ways you may not fully appreciate after your time abroad." "Their approval means nothing compared to my own judgment," he insisted. "And my judgment tells me that your company is far preferable to that of any debutante Lady Harrington might parade before me." The conviction in his voice was almost enough to make Rosalind believe him. Almost. But 5 years of social ostracism had taught her the power of the ton's collective disapproval, and she could not shake the certainty that their burgeoning connection was doomed before it truly began. As Percy guided the phaeton toward her cousin's home, having completed their public appearance, Rosalind steeled herself for what she knew must come, a gentle but firm withdrawal, an acknowledgement that while their brief acquaintance had been pleasant, it could not develop further. Instead, as he handed her down from the carriage, he asked, "Will you attend Lady Pembroke's ball next week?" Caught off guard, Rosalind shook her head. "I no longer receive invitations to such prominent events." Percy frowned. "That is easily remedied. I shall speak with Lady Pembroke." "Please don't," Rosalind said hastily. "I have no desire to attend where I am not genuinely welcome. Besides, my presence would only subject you to further speculation and interference. And if I told you I have no intention of attending unless you are present," he challenged, still holding her hand in his. Rosalind stared at him, trying to understand what lay behind his persistent attention. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why risk your social standing for someone like me?" Percy's expression softened. "Because in all of London, you are the only person who has spoken to me as though I am a man, not merely a title. Because your laughter is genuine, not calculated. Because I find myself thinking of you when you are not present, wondering what you might say about this or that occurrence." He paused, his gaze holding hers. "Is that reason enough?" It was too much, too honest, too revealing, too dangerous for her fragile heart. Rosalind withdrew her hand from his, taking a step back. "I think you romanticize me, Your Grace," she said, deliberately reverting to formality. "You see in me some novelty because I am outside your usual circle, but novelty fades and reality remains." "You underestimate both yourself and me," Percy replied, undeterred by her retreat. "But I shall not press you further today. Think on what I've said, Lady Rosalind, and perhaps consider that your own fears, rather than society's judgment, may be the greater obstacle between us." With a bow that was perfectly correct, yet somehow intimate, he took his leave, leaving Rosalind standing on her cousin's doorstep with her thoughts in turmoil and her heart beating an unsteady rhythm against her ribs. "Fear," she whispered to herself as she watched his carriage disappear down the street. "Yes, I am afraid, but only a fool would not be afraid of falling from such a height." 3 days passed with no word from the Duke, and Rosalind told herself it was for the best. Whatever momentary fascination she had held for him had evidently run its course, and they could both return to their proper places in society's hierarchy. She had almost convinced herself of this when Helena burst into the morning room, waving an envelope embossed with the Pembroke crest. "It's come," Helena exclaimed, her eyes bright with excitement. "An invitation to Lady Pembroke's ball addressed specifically to you." Rosalind took the envelope with trembling fingers. "That's impossible. Lady Pembroke hasn't acknowledged my existence in 5 years." Yet there it was, her name elegantly inscribed on the heavy cream paper. She broke the seal and read the invitation, which included a personal note from Lady Pembroke expressing her delight at the prospect of renewing their acquaintance after too long an interval. "This is his doing," Rosalind said, setting the invitation aside. "He must have spoken to Lady Pembroke despite my asking him not to." Helena clasped her hands. "Isn't it romantic? He's made it possible for you to attend the most important ball of the season." "It's presumptuous," Rosalind corrected, though she couldn't entirely suppress a flutter of pleasure at the thought that Percy had gone to such lengths. "And likely to cause more gossip than either of us needs." "Gossip is already circulating after your drive in the park," Helena pointed out. "According to Lady Winthrop, half the ton believes the Duke is smitten with you, while the other half is convinced he's merely being kind to a social unfortunate." Rosalind winced at the description. "Neither interpretation bodes well for my peace of mind." "But don't you see," Helena persisted, "this is your opportunity to re-enter society with the most eligible bachelor in London as your champion. Only think of it, in one evening, you could erase 5 years of isolation." It was a tempting vision, yet Rosalind hesitated. And if his interest proves fleeting, what then? "I shall have exposed myself to fresh scrutiny and judgment, only to be abandoned once more." Helena's expression softened. "Not every man is like Viscount Radley, Rosalind. Not every promised affection ends in betrayal." The mention of Radley, her former fiancé who had broken their engagement within days of her father's disgrace, sent a familiar pang through Rosalind's heart. "Perhaps not," she conceded. "But experience has taught me to guard against such disappointments." Experience can be a harsh but faulty teacher, Helena replied gently. Don't let it rob you of a chance at happiness. Rosalind picked up the invitation again, her thoughts conflicted. To attend would be to publicly acknowledge Percy's interest in her. It would raise expectations she still believed could not be fulfilled. Yet to decline would be to retreat further into the shadows, to concede that her father's shame would forever define her life. I shall think on it, she promised, though in her heart she had already begun to wonder what gown she might wear to a ball she had never expected to attend. That evening, as Rosalind sat in the small parlour reading, the butler appeared with a silver tray bearing a letter marked with the Westmoreland crest. Her heart quickened as she broke the seal. The letter was brief but direct, much like its author, Lady Rosalind. I trust by now you have received Lady Pembroke's invitation. Before you decide to refuse it out of some misguided sense of propriety, allow me to inform you that I shall be in attendance and would consider it a personal favor if you would save the first waltz for me. If your concern is for appearances, rest assured that my mother, the Dowager Duchess, will also be present and has expressed a particular interest in making your acquaintance. Her approval, should you secure it, would silence many of the whispers you so dread. I await your response and remain your devoted servant, Westmoreland. P.S. I have taken the liberty of having my groom deliver Apollo to your cousin's stable. He is a gentle bay gelding, accustomed to ladies, and is at your disposal for morning rides in the park. Consider it not a gift, but a loan between friends, if that eases your conscience. Rosalind read the letter twice, then set it down with shaking hands. The Duke was not merely persisting in his attention, he was escalating it. The mention of his mother, the Dowager Duchess of Westmoreland, a woman whose social influence was second only to the Queen's, was particularly significant. If Percy had indeed spoken to his mother about her, his interest was far more serious than Rosalind had allowed herself to believe. And the horse, Apollo, was a gesture so thoughtful it brought tears to her eyes. Percy had remembered her casual mention of missing riding and had acted to restore this small pleasure to her life. It was not the grand gesture of a man seeking to impress, but the considerate action of someone who had truly listened. Rosalind pressed the letter to her heart, allowing herself a moment of unchecked emotion. Then, with a deep breath, she moved to her writing desk to compose her reply. Your Grace, I confess myself both surprised and touched by your continued attentions. The invitation from Lady Pembroke was unexpected, as was your mention of the Dowager Duchess's interest in my acquaintance. While I remain concerned about the wisdom of my presence at such a gathering, I find I cannot refuse either Lady Pembroke's hospitality or your request for a dance. As for Apollo, your generosity overwhelms me. I attempted to decline this loan, as you term it, but found myself persuaded by your groom's insistence that the animal requires daily exercise. In the interest of the horse's well-being, therefore, I have agreed to ride him tomorrow morning. If you should happen to be riding in the park at 7 o'clock, perhaps our paths might cross, and I could express my gratitude in person. I remain your grateful friend, Rosalind Abernathy. She sealed the letter before she could reconsider its tone, which was more warm than she had initially intended. The reference to their potential meeting in the park was particularly forward, yet Rosalind found she did not regret it. Something was changing within her, a thawing of the careful reserve she had maintained since her father's death. Whether this change was wise remained to be seen, but for the first time in years, Rosalind allowed herself to hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the future might hold more for her than the lonely existence she had resigned herself to. The following morning dawned misty and cool, perfect weather for riding. Rosalind rose earlier than usual, dressing in her old but well-kept riding habit with a sense of anticipation she had not felt in years. When she reached the stables, Apollo was already saddled and waiting, a magnificent bay with intelligent eyes and impeccable breeding. He's a beauty, my lady, her cousin's elderly groom observed. Too fine for our stable, that's certain. The Duke must think highly of you. Rosalind stroked Apollo's velvet nose, avoiding the man's knowing gaze. His Grace is merely being kind, she replied, though she no longer fully believed it herself. The ride to Hyde Park was exhilarating. Apollo responded to the slightest touch, his gait smooth and powerful beneath her. For the first time since her father's disgrace, Rosalind felt truly free, the wind in her face and the rhythm of hoofbeats matching her heartbeat. The park was nearly empty at this early hour, just as she had hoped. A few dedicated riders nodded in greeting as she passed, but none seemed to recognize her or find her presence remarkable. Rosalind guided Apollo to a less frequented path, allowing him to stretch into a canter along a straight section bordered by ancient oaks. She was so absorbed in the joy of riding that she almost missed the solitary figure waiting at the intersection of two bridle paths. Percy sat astride a powerful black stallion, his tall form easy to distinguish even at a distance. As she approached, Rosalind saw that he was dressed informally in a dark riding coat, his cravat arranged with less precision than social occasions demanded. He looked, she thought, with a sudden catch in her breath, more handsome in this relaxed state than in all his formal ducal splendor. "Good morning, Lady Rosalind," he called as she drew near. "I see you and Apollo have become acquainted." Rosalind reined in beside him, her cheeks flushed with exercise and pleasure. "He's magnificent," she said, patting the horse's neck. "Far too fine for me, but I confess I'm selfishly glad you didn't heed my refusal." Percy's smile warmed his features. "Your enjoyment is all the justification I need. You look transformed." The intensity of his gaze made her look away, suddenly conscious of her windblown appearance. "I must look a fright," she demurred. "The morning air has played havoc with my hair." "You misunderstand me," Percy said quietly. "You look alive in a way I haven't seen before. It suits you." There was no artifice in his voice, no practiced flattery, only simple truth. Rosalind found herself without a ready response, unused to such direct appreciation. "Shall we continue together?" Percy suggested, saving her from having to reply. "There's a particularly pleasant circuit around the Serpentine that few know about at this hour." They rode side by side, their horses matching pace effortlessly. The early morning mist was beginning to burn away, golden shafts of sunlight breaking through the trees to dapple the path before them. In this peaceful setting, away from society's watchful eyes, Rosalind felt the tension she habitually carried begin to ease. "You've received my letter," Percy observed after a comfortable silence. "I hope I didn't overstep by mentioning my mother's interest in you." "It was unexpected," Rosalind admitted. "The Dowager Duchess is known for her exacting standards. I can't imagine she approves of your attention to someone in my position." Percy's expression turned wry. "My mother's primary concern is my happiness. She has watched me reject one eligible match after another since my return to England and has come to the conclusion that I might know my own mind in this matter." "And does your mind truly incline toward me?" Rosalind asked, the direct question escaping before she could consider its propriety. "Beyond the novelty of our acquaintance, I mean." Percy guided his mount closer to hers, their legs nearly touching as they rode. "I am not a man given to passing fancies, Lady Rosalind. When I devote my attention to something or someone, it is with serious intent." The implication of his words hung in the morning air between them, too significant to be directly acknowledged, yet too clear to be misunderstood. Rosalind's heart beat faster, but caution still held her in its grip. Serious intent can lead to serious regret when reality proves different from expectation, she said carefully. "You know little of me beyond what you've observed in our brief acquaintance." "Then allow me to know more," Percy replied, his gaze steady on her face. "Tell me about yourself, not the version society believes it knows, but the truth." It was a simple request, yet it struck Rosalind as profoundly intimate. Who was she, really, beneath the layers of grief and shame and careful self-protection she had built over the years? Who was the woman beneath the label of disgraced earl's daughter? I hardly know where to begin, she confessed. Begin with what you love, Percy suggested. What brings you joy? They had reached the shore of the Serpentine, the water glimmering in the strengthening sunlight. Rosalind slowed Apollo to a walk, considering the question. Books, she said finally. I've always found more truth in fiction than in drawing rooms. Music, I play the pianoforte, though not as well as I might with more practice. And this, she gestured to the park around them, to Apollo beneath her. The freedom of movement, of being in the open air without walls or watching eyes. Percy nodded, encouraging her to continue. I love early mornings and late nights, she went on, finding it easier to speak as she warmed to the subject. Dawn and dusk, when the world seems to hold its breath between states of being. I love conversations that go beyond weather and fashion. I love. She trailed off, suddenly self-conscious about revealing so much of herself. Go on, Percy urged gently. What else do you love? Rosalind met his gaze, finding in it something that gave her courage. Honesty, she said softly. I love honesty, even when it's difficult, perhaps especially then. I've had enough of pretense and polite fictions to last a lifetime. As have I, Percy agreed, his voice equally soft. It's one of the many things we have in common. They had stopped at the edge of the water, their horses standing quietly side by side. In the early morning solitude, with no observers save a few distant ducks, the space between them seemed charged with possibility. Lady Rosalind, Percy began, then corrected himself. Rosalind, I hope you know that my interest in you is neither casual nor calculated. I find in you a quality that I have searched for since my return to England, a genuineness, an integrity that has nothing to do with social position and everything to do with character. Rosalind's breath caught at his use of her given name, at the earnestness in his voice. Percy, she replied, the intimacy of addressing him so feeling both terrifying and right. I want to believe you, but I've learned through bitter experience that good intentions often falter when faced with social disapproval. Test me then, he challenged. Come to Lady Pembroke's ball, meet my mother. Allow me to show you that my regard is not so easily swayed by gossip or convention. The invitation was both thrilling and frightening. To step back into the bright center of society after years in its shadows, to do so with the Duke of Westmoreland's attention focused on her. It was a risk greater than any Rosalind had taken since her father's death. Yet looking at Percy's face, seeing the sincerity and determination there, she found herself nodding. Very well, she said. I shall attend the ball and meet your mother, but I make no promises beyond that. Percy's smile was like sunrise breaking over the horizon. No promises needed, he assured her, only your presence. As they turned their horses back toward the main paths, now growing busier with the fashionable morning riders, Rosalind felt a curious lightness in her chest, as though something long frozen had begun to thaw, allowing her to breathe more freely than she had in years. Whether this newfound feeling would lead to joy or pain remained to be seen. But for the first time since her world had collapsed around her, Rosalind found herself willing to risk discovering the answer. The week leading to Lady Pembroke's ball passed in a whirlwind of activity. Helena, delighted by Rosalind's decision to attend, insisted on having a new gown made for the occasion, overriding all protests about expense and practicality. Consider it my gift, Helena declared as they visited the modiste's shop. After 5 years of watching you hide in the shadows, I would spare no expense to see you shine as you deserve. The gown they selected was more daring than anything Rosalind had worn since her debut. Deep sapphire silk that brought out the gold in her hazel eyes, with an off-shoulder neckline that was fashionable without being overly revealing. It was a gown designed to be noticed, a statement that Lady Rosalind Abernathy was no longer content to be overlooked. Percy, true to his word, continued his attentions with a constancy that gradually wore away at Rosalind's skepticism. He arranged to meet her for morning rides 3 more times that week, each encounter strengthening the connection between them. They spoke of books they had read, places Percy had seen during his time abroad, and increasingly of personal matters that revealed the deeper workings of their minds. "Tell me about your father," Percy requested during one such ride, as they paused beneath the spreading branches of an ancient oak. "Not the man society whispered about, but the father you knew." The question would have seemed intrusive from anyone else, but Rosalind found herself willing to answer. He was complicated, she began, searching for words that could capture the complex man who had shaped her childhood. Brilliant in business until his final years, warm in private but distant in public. He taught me to ride, to manage accounts, to speak my mind, at least within the family. She paused, memories surfacing that she had long kept buried. He loved my mother desperately. When she died of consumption when I was 16, something in him changed. He began taking risks he would never have considered before, as though without her, nothing mattered quite as much. Percy listened intently, his expression compassionate without being pitying. "You don't blame him," he observed, "even after all that happened." "How can I?" Rosalind replied, her voice soft with remembered grief. "I saw his despair when he realized what he had done, the fortune lost, the family name tarnished. His suicide was not cowardice, as society claimed, but his final attempt to make amends. He believed his life insurance would cover his debts and leave something for me." "But it didn't," Percy guessed. Rosalind shook her head. "The policy was void in case of self-destruction. There was nothing left but debts and scandal." Percy reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "You've carried this burden alone for too long," he said, his voice low with emotion. "Your father's mistakes were not yours to bear." "Weren't they?" Rosalind asked, though her fingers tightened around his. "We inherit not only our parents' fortunes, but their reputations, their choices. Society has made that abundantly clear." "Society," Percy said firmly, "can go hang." The vehemence in his tone startled a laugh from Rosalind. "Such language, Your Grace. What would your mother say?" "My mother," Percy replied with a hint of mischief, "would likely express the same sentiment in more elegant terms, but with equal conviction. You'll understand when you meet her." The mention of their impending introduction at Lady Pembroke's ball sent a flutter of anxiety through Rosalind. "I fear her disappointment," she admitted. "However gracious she may be, a duke's mother cannot truly wish for her son to form an attachment to someone in my position." Percy's expression grew serious. "My mother wishes for my happiness above all else, and in the short time we've known each other, you have made me happier than I've been since returning to England." He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. "Trust in that, if nothing else." As they parted that morning, with the promise to see each other at the ball the following evening, Rosalind found that she did trust him, more than she had trusted anyone in years. Whether that trust was wise remained to be seen, but it felt like the first step towards something she had long since ceased to hope for, a future not defined by past tragedy. The night of Lady Pembroke's ball arrived with a mixture of anticipation and dread for Rosalind. As Helena's lady's maid arranged her hair in an elegant style, adorned with sapphire pins that matched her gown, Rosalind could not help but remember the last grand ball she had attended, 5 years ago, when she had been engaged to Viscount Radley and secure in her place in society. "You look beautiful," Helena declared, entering the dressing room to assess the final result. "The Duke will be utterly captivated." Rosalind studied her reflection, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. The sapphire gown brought color to cheeks too often pale with resignation. The elegant hairstyle framed features that had matured from pretty to striking in the years since her debut. "I look different," she observed, turning slightly to view the gown's effect from another angle. You look like yourself, Helena corrected gently, the self you've kept hidden away for too long. As their carriage joined the line of vehicles approaching Lady Pembroke's magnificent townhouse, Rosalind fought to control her rising anxiety. The last time she had entered such a gathering, whispers had followed her like shadows, pitying glances and averted eyes, marking her passage through rooms that had once welcomed her warmly. "Remember," Helena said, squeezing her hand as they waited their turn to alight, "you are Lady Rosalind Abernathy, daughter of the Earl of Milford. Your father's actions do not define you, and neither does society's judgment." Rosalind returned the pressure, grateful for her cousin's unwavering support. "Thank you for never doubting me, even when I doubted myself." When they finally entered the ballroom, Rosalind kept her chin high and her expression composed, though her heart pounded beneath the silk of her gown. As expected, heads turned at her appearance, conversations faltered as recognition spread. Lady Rosalind Abernathy returned to society after 5 years of disgrace. It was fodder for gossip too delicious to ignore. Yet there was something different in the quality of the attention she received. Instead of the pity or disdain she had come to expect, there was curiosity and, in some cases, a grudging respect. The knowledge that she had received Lady Pembroke's personal invitation, and more significantly, that the Duke of Westmoreland had shown marked interest in her, had transformed her status from social pariah to person of interest. Lady Pembroke herself approached almost immediately, her elaborate turban nodding with the vigor of her greeting. "Lady Rosalind, my dear, how delightful to see you again after such a long absence. You look positively radiant." The warmth of the welcome, though Rosalind knew it was motivated more by Percy's influence than genuine affection, still eased some of her tension. "Thank you for including me, Lady Pembroke. It's a pleasure to attend such a beautiful gathering." "We've missed your presence at these affairs," Lady Pembroke continued, linking her arm through Rosalind's and guiding her further into the ballroom. "Such a shame that circumstances kept you away for so long. But we must look forward, not back, mustn't we? And speaking of looking forward, I believe there is someone most eager to see you." She gestured across the room to where Percy stood in conversation with an elegant older woman whose bearing marked her unmistakably as the Dowager Duchess of Westmoreland. As though sensing Rosalind's gaze, Percy looked up, his expression brightening visibly when their eyes met. "Ah, youth and its enthusiasms," Lady Pembroke remarked with satisfied amusement. "I shall leave you to make your way to his grace. Do remember that I've placed you at his table for supper." With that transparent piece of matchmaking, Lady Pembroke departed to greet other guests, leaving Rosalind to face the prospect of crossing the crowded ballroom to where Percy and his mother waited. Taking a deep breath, she began to move through the throng, acknowledging with small nods the greetings of those who deigned to recognize her. Before she could reach them, however, her path was blocked by a familiar figure whose appearance sent a shock of unwelcome recognition through her. Viscount Radley, the man who had once promised to be her husband, stood before her, his handsome face wearing the same charming smile that had once captivated her younger self. 5 years had added a touch of silver to his temples, but had done nothing to diminish the self-assured elegance that had first attracted her. "Lady Rosalind," he said, bowing with exaggerated courtesy, "what an unexpected pleasure. You look remarkably well." Rosalind cursed inwardly at this unfortunate encounter, but maintained her composure. "Lord Radley, I trust you are in good health." "Excellent health, thank you," he replied, his gaze moving appreciatively over her figure in a way that once would have thrilled her, but now merely irritated. "Marriage agrees with me, as does fatherhood. We have 2 sons now, you know." "How fortunate for you," Rosalind said, keeping her tone neutral. "If you'll excuse me, I'm expected elsewhere." Radley shifted slightly, blocking her path once more. "Not so fast, my dear. We have much to catch up on. I've been following the gossip with great interest. They say Westmoreland has developed a tender for you. Quite the coup, if true." The casual cruelty of his words, the implication that Percy's interest was something to be exploited rather than treasured, reminded Rosalind of why she had eventually come to be grateful that their engagement had ended. "What his grace chooses to do with his time is his own affair," she replied coolly. "Now, if you'll pardon me." "Of course," Radley said, stepping aside with a mocking bow. "Far be it from me to stand between a lady and her duke. Just a word of friendly advice, Rosalind, don't mistake attention for intention. Men of his rank often seek diversions before settling into suitable marriages." The barb struck deeper than Rosalind cared to admit, echoing her own unspoken fears. But before she could form a response, a deep voice spoke from behind her. "Lady Rosalind, there you are. My mother is most eager to make your acquaintance." Percy stood at her shoulder, his tall figure radiating a controlled tension that suggested he had overheard at least part of Radley's remarks. His expression was pleasant enough, but there was a hardness in his eyes as he looked at the Viscount that warned of barely restrained anger. "Your Grace," Radley acknowledged, his confidence faltering slightly under Percy's steady gaze. "I was just reminiscing with Lady Rosalind about old times." "How fascinating," Percy replied, his tone making it clear he found it anything but. "Unfortunately, I must insist on claiming Lady Rosalind's attention. We are engaged for the first dance." He offered his arm to Rosalind, who took it gratefully, relieved to escape the uncomfortable encounter. "Viscount," Percy added as they turned away, "I suggest you rejoin your wife. Lady Radley appears somewhat distressed by your extended conversation with Lady Rosalind." Radley glanced across the room to where his wife indeed stood watching, her expression a study in poorly concealed jealousy and resentment. With a final nod that was more grimace than courtesy, he withdrew, leaving Rosalind and Percy to continue toward where the Dowager Duchess waited. "Thank you," Rosalind murmured, her hand tightening on Percy's arm. Lord Radley's conversation was becoming trying. Percy's expression softened as he looked down at her. "I apologize for not reaching you sooner. I saw him approach and was concerned, but my mother insisted on knowing who had captured my attention so thoroughly before allowing me to come to your rescue." "And what did you tell her?" Rosalind asked, her nerves returning at the prospect of meeting the formidable dowager. "The truth," Percy replied simply, "that I have met a woman of exceptional character and intelligence who has made me reconsider everything I thought I knew about what I want in a life partner." The words, spoken with such quiet certainty, struck Rosalind speechless. Before she could recover enough to respond, they had reached the Dowager Duchess, who regarded Rosalind with keen interest. "Mother," Percy said, his voice warm with genuine affection, "may I present Lady Rosalind Abernathy." "Lady Rosalind, my mother, Her Grace the Dowager Duchess of Westmoreland." Rosalind curtsied deeply, conscious of the older woman's scrutiny. "Your Grace, it is an honor." The Dowager Duchess, a handsome woman whose silver hair and regal bearing spoke of decades at the pinnacle of society, extended her hand with surprising warmth. "Lady Rosalind, the pleasure is mine. My son has spoken of you with such enthusiasm that I confess I've been quite eager to meet you." There was genuine interest in the Duchess's voice, free from the condescension Rosalind had expected. As Percy was momentarily distracted by a greeting from a passing acquaintance, the Dowager took the opportunity to speak more candidly. "You must understand, Lady Rosalind, that as a mother, I am naturally concerned with my son's happiness and well-being. Since his return from India, I have watched him move through society with a kind of detached politeness that has worried me greatly." Her shrewd eyes held Rosalind's. "Until recently, that is. These past days, he has shown more animation, more genuine interest in life than I have seen in years, and he attributes this change to his acquaintance with you." Rosalind flushed under the directness of the Duchess's gaze. "Your Grace, I fear your son exaggerates my influence. Our acquaintance is still quite new." Some connections require little time to reveal their significance, the Dowager replied with a small smile. I knew the late Duke was the man I would marry within an hour of our introduction. The heart has its own wisdom, independent of time's passage. Before Rosalind could formulate a response to this extraordinary statement, the orchestra began tuning for the first dance. Percy turned back to them, offering his arm to Rosalind. If you'll excuse us, Mother, I believe Lady Rosalind promised me the first waltz. The Dowager Duchess nodded, her expression thoughtful as she watched them move toward the dance floor. We shall continue our conversation at supper, Lady Rosalind, she called after them. I find I have much more to learn about you. As Percy led her to their position among the forming sets, Rosalind glanced up at him with mingled confusion and wonder. Your mother is not at all what I expected, she admitted quietly. Percy smiled, his hand settling at her waist as the music began. Did you expect a dragon guarding the family honor against unworthy intruders? Something like that, Rosalind confessed, as they began to move through the steps of the waltz. Instead, she seems almost approving. My mother is an excellent judge of character, Percy replied, guiding her smoothly around a slower couple. And contrary to what you might believe, she cares far more for substance than for superficial social standing. The dance carried them around the perimeter of the ballroom, and Rosalind was acutely aware of the attention they were attracting. To be partnered by the Duke of Westmoreland for the first waltz was a clear statement of preference that no one in the room could miss. Everyone is watching us, she murmured, a touch of her earlier anxiety returning. Let them, Percy replied, echoing his words from their drive in the park. I want them to see us together. I want there to be no mistake about my intentions toward you. Rosalind's heart stuttered at the implication of his words. Percy, she said hesitantly, Viscount Radley suggested that your attention might be less than honorable, that men of your rank sometimes seek diversions before making suitable marriages. Percy's expression darkened momentarily before clearing. Radley is speaking from his own character, not mine. He abandoned you when loyalty was most needed. I am not surprised he cannot comprehend a man acting from better motives. His gaze held hers as they turned through another figure of the dance. I am not toying with your affections, Rosalind. My interest is not casual, nor is it a prelude to some more suitable connection. When I commit my heart, it is without reservation or ulterior motive. The music swelled around them, and Rosalind found herself drawn closer to Percy than strict propriety might allow. In the candlelit ballroom, with his arms supporting her and his eyes holding hers with such sincere intensity, the fears and doubts that had plagued her for years seemed to recede. I want to believe you, she whispered, allowing herself the dangerous luxury of hope. Despite everything experience has taught me, I find that I do believe you. Percy's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. Then that is enough for now. The rest will follow in its own time. As the waltz concluded, Percy did not immediately release her hand, but continued to hold it as he led her from the dance floor. The gesture, small but significant, was not lost on the watching crowd. By morning, Rosalind knew all of London would be discussing the Duke of Westmoreland's marked preference for the once disgraced Lady Rosalind Abernathy. For the first time in 5 years, the prospect of being the subject of gossip did not fill her with dread. Let them talk, she thought with newfound confidence. Let them wonder. For tonight, at least, she would allow herself to enjoy being the woman who had captured the attention of the most eligible bachelor in London, not for her fortune or her family connections, but for herself. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of dances, conversations, and moments of quiet connection with Percy. True to Lady Pembroke's arrangement, Rosalind found herself seated beside him at supper, with the Dowager Duchess across from them, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. Lady Rosalind, the Duchess said as they were served, my son tells me you are an accomplished musician. The pianoforte, I believe. I play a little, your grace, Rosalind acknowledged, though I fear lack of practice has diminished whatever skill I once possessed. Modesty is commendable, but false modesty merely wastes time, the dowager replied with surprising directness. If you play, say so. If you play well, acknowledge it. If you play poorly, improve. I have little patience for the feminine custom of denying one's abilities to appear more pleasing. Percy chuckled at Rosalind's startled expression. My mother believes in directness, he explained. It can be disconcerting to those accustomed to society's more circuitous approaches. On the contrary, Rosalind said, recovering her composure, I find it refreshing. In that spirit, then. Yes, I play the pianoforte, and before my circumstances changed, I was considered quite proficient. With regular practice, I believe I could become so again. The dowager's face creased in a smile of approval. Much better. Tell me, what else do you do well, without qualification or apology? The question, asked with such forthright interest, drew from Rosalind a more honest self-assessment than she had allowed herself in years. As the meal progressed, she found herself engaged in a conversation unlike any she had experienced in a society gathering, one that demanded authenticity rather than polite evasions. By the time they rose from the table, Rosalind realized with some surprise that she had thoroughly enjoyed the dowager's company. More significantly, she sensed that the Duchess's interest in her was genuine rather than a mere courtesy extended for her son's sake. You must call on me tomorrow afternoon, the dowager said, as they prepared to return to the ballroom for the evening's final dances. There is a new piece of music I acquired from Vienna that I believe would suit your playing style admirably. The invitation, offered in the hearing of several prominent society matrons whose daughters had long sought such favor, caused a ripple of barely concealed astonishment. Rosalind herself was momentarily speechless, aware of the honor being bestowed and its implications. I would be delighted, your grace, she managed, recovering her poise. What time would be convenient? 3 o'clock, the Duchess replied. Percy shall bring you in his carriage. Now, I believe my son is eager to claim you for another dance before the evening concludes. With that, she moved away to speak with Lady Pembroke, leaving Rosalind to face Percy's barely suppressed smile of triumph. You have conquered the dragon, he observed quietly, offering his arm to lead her back to the ballroom. I don't believe I've ever seen my mother issue an invitation with such spontaneous enthusiasm. I can hardly believe it myself, Rosalind admitted. She is formidable, yet not at all as intimidating as her reputation suggests. Only because she approves of you, Percy corrected with a chuckle. Believe me, those who earn her disapproval find her intimidating indeed. As they rejoined the dancers for the final waltz of the evening, Rosalind felt a curious lightness in her spirit, a sensation of possibilities opening before her, where once there had been only resignation and carefully managed expectations. The music swelled around them, and Percy's hand at her waist drew her slightly closer than before, a subtle intimacy that sent a thrill of awareness through her. Looking up into his face, Rosalind saw an expression of such tender regard that her breath caught in her throat. What are you thinking? She asked, suddenly needing to hear his thoughts spoken aloud. Percy's eyes held hers as they moved through the graceful patterns of the dance. I am thinking, he said softly, that I have waited a very long time to feel as I do when I am with you, and that I am not willing to let convention or gossip or the ghost of your father's mistakes stand between us. The candlelight caught the gold flecks in his dark eyes, giving them an extraordinary warmth as he continued. I am thinking that tonight marks a beginning, not an end. And I am wondering if you might share that view. In that moment, surrounded by the cream of London society, yet feeling as though they existed in a world apart, Rosalind made a decision. The caution that had governed her life since her father's disgrace, the belief that love and happiness were luxuries no longer available to her, these had protected her heart but had also imprisoned it. "Yes," she said simply, the word carrying more meaning than its brevity suggested. "I believe it does mark a beginning." Percy's smile in response was like nothing she had seen before, a pure expression of joy that transformed his habitually reserved features and confirmed what she had begun to suspect: that the carefully controlled Duke of Westmoreland felt far more deeply than he typically allowed the world to see. As the final notes of the waltz faded away, he did not immediately release her, but held her gaze for a moment longer. "Tomorrow at 3, then," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "And perhaps, if you are willing, a morning ride before that." "I should like that very much," Rosalind replied, her own smile reflecting his. "Apollo has become quite accustomed to my company. It would be a shame to disappoint him." With a formal bow that contrasted with the warmth in his eyes, Percy escorted her back to Helena's side. The evening was drawing to a close, and carriages were being called for departing guests. As they waited for Helena's husband to return from the card-room, Percy leaned closer to speak privately to Rosalind. "Tonight has been everything I hoped it would be," he said. "You have charmed my mother, silenced the worst of the gossips, and most importantly, begun to believe that your past need not dictate your future." Rosalind looked up at him, struck by the accuracy of his observation. "How did you know that was what I needed most?" Percy's expression softened. "Because I recognized in you something I once felt myself, the belief that circumstances beyond your control had permanently altered your path. In India, I learned that such beliefs are merely the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of our lives. They can be rewritten when we find the courage to do so." Before she could respond, Helena's husband appeared, signaling that their carriage awaited. Percy raised Rosalind's gloved hand to his lips in a gesture that, while perfectly proper, conveyed a depth of feeling that sent a warm flush to her cheeks. "Until tomorrow," he said, releasing her hand slowly. "Until tomorrow," Rosalind echoed, already looking forward to their next meeting with an anticipation that would have been unimaginable just weeks before. As their carriage moved through the darkened London streets toward home, Helena could barely contain her excitement. "The entire evening was a triumph," she declared. "Did you see Lady Harrington's face when the Dowager Duchess invited you to call? I thought she might swallow her lorgnette in shock." Rosalind laughed, the sound coming easily in the aftermath of the evening's unexpected success. "I was rather focused on not appearing as astonished as I felt. The Duchess is quite unlike anyone I've ever met." "And the Duke," Helena continued, her eyes bright with vicarious pleasure, "could scarcely take his eyes from you all evening. Everyone noticed. By tomorrow, you'll be the primary topic of conversation in every drawing room in Mayfair." The prospect would have terrified Rosalind just weeks ago. Now, she found she could face it with equanimity. "Let them talk," she said, echoing Percy's words from earlier. "For once, I find I don't much care what they say." Helena reached across to squeeze her hand. "That, my dear cousin, may be the most significant triumph of all." Later, as Rosalind prepared for bed, she stood by her window looking out at the night sky. The stars seemed brighter somehow, the future less constrained by the shadows of the past. Something had shifted within her during the course of the evening, a loosening of the tight control she had maintained over her hopes and expectations since her father's death. Percy Trentham, with his direct gaze and unwavering attention, had begun to make her believe that perhaps, just perhaps, love was not a luxury beyond her reach after all. It was a dangerous thought, yet one she found herself unable and unwilling to dismiss. With a small smile, Rosalind turned from the window and extinguished her candle. Tomorrow would bring a morning ride, an afternoon visit to the Dowager Duchess, and perhaps new steps along this unexpected path that had opened before her. For the first time in 5 years, she looked forward to the dawn with genuine anticipation rather than resigned acceptance. Whatever came next, Rosalind knew that something fundamental had changed. The careful walls she had built around her heart had begun to crumble, and in their place, hope was cautiously taking root. The morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for riding. Rosalind rose earlier than usual, her anticipation for the day ahead making sleep impossible. By 6:30, she was dressed in her riding habit and waiting in the small morning room, too restless to eat the light breakfast Helena's maid had prepared. Percy arrived precisely at 7, his punctuality another testament to his genuine interest. As they rode toward the park side by side, Rosalind felt a new ease in his company, a comfortable familiarity that belied their short acquaintance. "You seem different this morning," Percy observed as they entered the relative privacy of a tree-lined path. "More at peace, perhaps." Rosalind considered this assessment. "I believe I am," she acknowledged. "Last night was illuminating in many ways." "Tell me," he encouraged, guiding his mount closer to hers. She turned to look at him directly, the early morning sunlight casting dappled shadows across his strong features. "For 5 years, I've defined myself by my father's disgrace." She began slowly, articulating thoughts that had crystallized during her sleepless night. "I accepted society's judgment as though it were my own, believing that certain doors were forever closed to me." Percy nodded, his expression intent as he listened. "Last night, when your mother treated me with such unexpected warmth, when others who had once shunned me suddenly found me worthy of attention again, I realized something important." Rosalind's voice grew stronger as she continued. "Their opinions of me changed not because I had changed, but because you chose to favor me with your attention. Their judgment was as arbitrary in its approval as it had been in its condemnation." "And this realization brings you peace?" Percy asked, sounding surprised. Rosalind smiled, understanding his confusion. "It frees me," she explained. "If their good opinion can be won or lost based on something as superficial as your interest in me, then it has no true value. I need not chase it or fear its loss. What matters is what I know of myself and what those who truly care for me believe." Percy's expression cleared, his eyes warming with appreciation. "That is a profound insight, and one that many never achieve despite decades in society's highest circles." They had reached a secluded clearing near the Serpentine, one of the few places in the park that offered genuine privacy at this early hour. By unspoken agreement, they dismounted, leading their horses to the water's edge to drink. "There's something I wish to say to you," Percy said after a moment of companionable silence. "Something I've been considering since our first meeting." There was a seriousness in his tone that made Rosalind's heart beat faster. "Yes." Percy turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "Rosalind, in the short time we've known each other, I have come to admire you more than any woman of my acquaintance. Your grace under difficulty, your intelligence, your honesty, these qualities have impressed me deeply." He paused, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I know that conventionally, more time should pass before such declarations are made. But I have never been particularly conventional, and I see no virtue in pretending an uncertainty I do not feel." Rosalind stood very still, hardly daring to believe where his words might be leading. "I find myself," Percy continued, his voice deepening with emotion, "thinking of you constantly when we are apart and treasuring every moment in your company. In short, I believe I am falling in love with you, Rosalind Abernathy." The declaration, spoken with such simple sincerity, sent a wave of emotion through Rosalind so powerful that for a moment she could not respond. When she finally found her voice, it trembled slightly with the effort of containing her feelings. "Percy, this is so unexpected. We've known each other such a short time." "Time is a poor measure of connection," he replied, echoing his mother's words from the previous evening. "I knew within days of meeting you that there was something extraordinary between us. Tell me you don't feel it too." Rosalind looked up into his face, this man who had entered her life so suddenly and changed it so completely, and found she could not deny the truth. "I do feel it," she admitted softly, "but I am afraid." "Of what?" "Of hoping too much," she whispered. "Of believing in a happiness that might prove as fragile as my father's fortunes." Percy's hands tightened around hers. "Some fortunes can be lost, Rosalind, but true connection between two people, that is a wealth that cannot be taken away. I believe what we are building together has that kind of permanence." He released one of her hands to gently touch her cheek. "I am not asking for an immediate answer, only that you consider the possibility of a future with me, one where you are no longer defined by the past, but by the life we might create together." The tenderness in his touch, the sincerity in his voice, broke through the last of Rosalind's carefully maintained defenses. 5 years of caution and restraint gave way to a surge of feeling she could no longer deny or contain. "Percy," she said, her voice steadier now, "I have spent so long believing that love and happiness were luxuries no longer available to me, that my father's disgrace had determined my fate. Meeting you, knowing you, has shown me how wrong I was." She took a deep breath, gathering courage for her own declaration. "I cannot say precisely when it happened, but somewhere between our dance at Lady Thornfield's ball and this moment, I have fallen in love with you as well." The joy that blazed in Percy's eyes at her words was answer enough to any lingering doubts she might have harbored. With gentle deliberation, he drew her closer, giving her ample time to withdraw if she wished. But Rosalind found herself moving toward him willingly, closing the distance between them until his lips met hers in a kiss that, though brief and proper in its restraint, sealed the understanding between them more surely than any formal declaration could have done. When they parted, Rosalind felt transformed, as though the woman she had been just moments before had given way to someone new, someone braver and more hopeful than she had allowed herself to be in years. "We should return," she said reluctantly, aware that even at this early hour the risk of discovery grew with each passing minute. "Your mother is expecting me this afternoon, and I would not wish to give her cause to regret her good opinion." Percy smiled, helping her mount Apollo with hands that lingered perhaps a moment longer than necessary at her waist. "My mother's opinion of you is unlikely to be diminished by anything so natural as our growing attachment," he assured her. "But you are right, discretion remains important, at least for now." As they rode back toward the more populated areas of the park, Rosalind found herself wondering what, for now, might signify. Was Percy suggesting that their relationship might soon reach a point where discretion would no longer be necessary? The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. They parted at Helena's door with a formal exchange that betrayed nothing of what had passed between them in the privacy of the park. Yet as Percy rode away, promising to return at 2:30 to escort her to the Dowager Duchess's residence, Rosalind felt the imprint of his kiss like a seal upon her heart, a promise more binding than any spoken vow. Inside, she found Helena waiting eagerly for news of the morning's ride. "Well," her cousin demanded as soon as they were alone, "you're positively glowing, Rosalind. What happened?" Rosalind hesitated, not yet ready to share the precious new understanding between herself and Percy. "We talked," she said simply, "about many things, and I believe he cares for me, Helena, not as a curiosity or a temporary diversion, but truly." Helena's face softened with genuine pleasure. "Of course he does, my dear. Anyone with eyes can see it. The question is, do you return his feelings?" Touching her lips unconsciously, where the warmth of Percy's kiss still lingered, Rosalind nodded. "I do," she admitted, "though it terrifies me almost as much as it delights me." "Love often does," Helena replied with the wisdom of one happily married for over a decade. "The greater the joy it promises, the greater the fear of losing it." "But Rosalind, you of all people know that safety offers poor compensation for a life without love." It was true, Rosalind realized. In her determination to protect herself from further pain after her father's suicide and Radley's abandonment, She had closed herself off from the very experiences that gave life its deepest meaning. Percy had begun to change that, offering her a vision of a future far richer than the careful existence she had resigned herself to. "He's taking me to meet his mother this afternoon," she said, changing the subject slightly. "The Dowager Duchess invited me to see some new music she's acquired from Vienna." Helena's eyebrows rose. "An invitation to a private audience with the Dowager? My dear, that's as good as a declaration of serious intent from the Duke. His mother is known to be extremely selective about whom she admits to her inner circle." "You're reading too much into a simple courtesy," Rosalind protested, though her heart quickened at the thought. "Am I?" Helena countered. "The Tuns certainly won't think so. By this evening, speculation about an impending announcement will be rampant." The prospect should have alarmed Rosalind, yet she found she could face it with surprising equanimity. Whatever came, she was no longer the same woman who had hidden in society's shadows for 5 years, ashamed of a disgrace that had never been hers to bear. The afternoon found Rosalind dressed in her finest day gown, a creation of pale green silk that Helena assured her brought out the gold in her hair and eyes. As she waited for Percy's carriage, she found herself both eager and nervous about the coming visit. The Dowager Duchess's approval the previous night had been unexpected and gratifying, but a more intimate meeting in the Duchess's own home would be a truer test of her acceptance. Despite Percy's assurances, Rosalind knew that his mother's influence could either smooth their path or create significant obstacles. When Percy arrived, his appreciative glance as she descended the stairs sent a flush of pleasure to her cheeks. "You look beautiful," he said simply, taking her hand to assist her into the carriage. "Thank you," she replied, settling her skirts around her. "I confess I'm rather nervous about this visit. Your mother is formidable." Percy laughed as he took his seat beside her. "She cultivates that impression quite deliberately, I assure you. In private, you'll find her far more approachable." The Dowager Duchess resided in the Dower House on the Westmoreland London estate, a smaller but still impressive residence adjacent to Percy's main house in Grosvenor Square. As their carriage passed through the gates and along the short drive separating the two properties, Rosalind had her first glimpse of what life as Duchess of Westmoreland might entail. The thought brought her up short. Was she truly contemplating such a possibility? The events of the morning, Percy's declaration, and her own admission of growing feelings seemed to point in that direction. Yet Rosalind could not quite believe that fate, which had dealt her such cruel blows in the past, might now offer her such extraordinary happiness. The Dowager received them in an elegantly appointed drawing-room where a magnificent pianoforte occupied pride of place near the windows. After the initial greetings, Percy excused himself, explaining that he had estate business to attend to. "I shall return in 2 hours," he told Rosalind, his eyes conveying a warmth that made the Dowager Duchess raise an eyebrow in knowing amusement. "Unless, of course, my mother has exhausted your patience before then." "I believe Lady Rosalind possesses both the fortitude and the intelligence to endure my company without your protection, Percy," the Duchess remarked dryly. "Run along to your business. We shall manage admirably without you." Once they were alone, the Dowager gestured for Rosalind to be seated on a nearby settee, while she took an armchair positioned to catch the afternoon light. "Now, my dear," she began without preamble, "let us dispense with pleasantries and speak honestly. My son is clearly enamored with you, and if I am not mistaken, you return his regard. Is this assessment accurate?" Startled by the Duchess's directness, Rosalind hesitated only briefly before responding with equal candor. "It is, Your Grace. Though our acquaintance has been brief, I find myself deeply attached to your son." The Duchess nodded, seeming pleased by this straightforward answer. "Good. I detest artificial modesty and coy evasions. Now, I presume you have concerns about the suitability of such an attachment, given your family circumstances." "I would be foolish not to," Rosalind acknowledged. Society has long memories, your grace, and my father's disgrace is not easily forgotten. As Duchess, I would bring neither fortune nor unblemished connections to the title. Fortunately, the Dowager replied with a slight smile, Westmoreland has fortune enough for both of you, and as for connections, the Trentham name has withstood far worse than association with financial misfortune. She leaned forward, her expression growing more serious. What you would bring, Lady Rosalind, is something far more valuable to my son than money or social advantage. You would bring understanding, intelligence, and a heart uncorrupted by ambition or artifice. These are rare qualities, particularly in the circles where dukes must typically seek their wives. Rosalind found herself deeply moved by the Duchess's assessment. You honor me with your good opinion, your grace. I merely state what I observe, the Dowager replied matter-of-factly. My son has been searching for something since his return from India, a purpose, a connection that makes his position meaningful rather than merely burdensome. In you, I believe he has found it. She rose, moving to the pianoforte with a grace that belied her years. Now, shall we examine this music I mentioned? I believe your playing style would be particularly suited to Chopin's newer compositions. For the next hour, Rosalind found herself engaged in a surprisingly enjoyable musical interlude with the Dowager Duchess. The older woman's knowledge of music was extensive, and her guidance as Rosalind attempted the challenging Chopin nocturne was both patient and insightful. As they paused for tea, the Duchess regarded Rosalind with renewed interest. You play with feeling as well as technical skill, she observed. Music reveals much about a person's character. Yours, I think, runs deeper than many might suspect from your quiet demeanor. My father used to say something similar, Rosalind recalled, a bittersweet smile touching her lips. He claimed he could gauge my mood more accurately by listening to my playing than by my conversation. A perceptive man, despite his unfortunate end, the Duchess said, her tone free from judgment. Tell me, Lady Rosalind, what do you recall of him beyond the circumstances of his disgrace? The question, asked with such simple directness, opened a floodgate of memories Rosalind had kept carefully contained for years. As she spoke of her father, his intelligence, his kindness, his devastating grief after her mother's death, she found herself sharing truths she had scarcely acknowledged even to herself. Her anger at his abandonment through suicide, her shame at her relief when the initial scandal had faded, her guilt at sometimes wishing she had been born to a different family with a less complicated legacy. Throughout her unexpected confession, the Dowager Duchess listened without interruption or visible judgment, her keen eyes assessing not just Rosalind's words, but the emotions behind them. You have carried these burdens alone for too long, she said finally, when Rosalind fell silent. It speaks to your strength of character that they have not embittered you, merely made you cautious. She set down her teacup with deliberate precision. My late husband, the 6th Duke, was an exceptional man in many ways, but he was not without flaws. There were periods in our marriage when his gambling threatened our financial security, times when his temper drove away those who might have been allies. Yet these failings did not define him, nor do they define his legacy. Rosalind looked at her in surprise. I had not heard. The Duke of Westmoreland was always spoken of with such respect. As he deserved to be, the Duchess confirmed. His virtues far outweighed his faults. But my point, Lady Rosalind, is that we all carry imperfections, our own and those of our families. What matters is not the absence of flaws, but how we address them, learn from them, and ultimately transcend them. She reached across to take Rosalind's hand in a gesture of unexpected warmth. Your father made grave errors in judgment that hurt those he loved most. This is tragic, but it is not your tragedy to bear indefinitely. You have honored his memory by conducting yourself with dignity through difficult times. Now, perhaps, it is time to honor yourself by embracing happiness when it is offered. There was such compassionate wisdom in the Duchess's words that Rosalind felt tears threatening. For 5 years, she had carried the weight of her father's disgrace as a personal burden, believing it her duty to atone for his mistakes through a life of quiet self-denial. The suggestion that she might set down this burden, that doing so might even be the right choice, was both liberating and terrifying. "Thank you, Your Grace," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your kindness and understanding mean more than I can express." The Duchess smiled, a genuine warmth transforming her aristocratic features. "I have lived long enough to recognize worthy character when I encounter it, Lady Rosalind. And I have come to believe that my son has excellent judgment in this, as in most matters." Before Rosalind could respond, the door opened to admit Percy, returned from his business as promised. He paused on the threshold, his gaze moving between his mother and Rosalind with obvious curiosity. "I interrupt at a significant moment, I see," he observed, coming further into the room. "May I hope it is a favorable one?" The Dowager Duchess rose with elegant deliberation. "Your Lady Rosalind and I have reached an understanding, I believe, one that bodes well for future conversations." The emphasis she placed on the final word was slight, but unmistakable, as was her use of the possessive "your" before Rosalind's name. Percy's eyes widened slightly at his mother's implication, then warmed as he looked at Rosalind. "I am glad to hear it," he said simply, though his expression conveyed far more than his words. The Duchess moved toward the door with a rustle of silk skirts. "I shall leave you to escort Lady Rosalind home, Percy. The afternoon grows late, and I have correspondence to attend to." She paused, turning back to Rosalind. "My dear, I hope we shall see much more of each other in the coming days. You must join us for a family dinner soon, perhaps this Friday. Percy, arrange it with Simmons before you leave." With that, she swept from the room, leaving Rosalind and Percy alone in the elegant drawing-room. As soon as the door closed behind his mother, Percy moved to Rosalind's side, taking her hands in his. "You have worked a miracle," he said, his voice low with emotion. "I have never seen my mother so quickly or thoroughly won over by anyone." Rosalind shook her head, still somewhat dazed by the entire encounter. "It is she who has been extraordinarily kind to me, Percy, your mother spoke of. Future conversations," she seemed to imply. "That I intend to offer you marriage," he finished when she trailed off uncertainly. She implied nothing that is not true, though I had hoped to approach the subject with somewhat more romance and less maternal intervention. He led her to a seat by the window, then knelt before her in a gesture so unexpected that Rosalind's breath caught in her throat. "I had planned a more elaborate setting for this," Percy said, looking up at her with an expression of such tender regard that her heart seemed to expand in her chest. "Perhaps a moonlit garden or a private moment during a ball. But I find I cannot wait for such orchestrated perfection, not when my heart is so decided." He took her hands in his touch warm and sure. "Rosalind Abernathy, in the short time I have known you, you have transformed my understanding of what it means to truly connect with another person. Your courage in facing adversity, your quiet dignity, your capacity for joy despite past sorrows, these qualities have captured my heart completely." Rosalind could scarcely breathe, the moment seeming both entirely real and somehow dreamlike in its perfection. "I love you," Percy continued, his voice deepening with emotion, "and I would be honored beyond words if you would consent to become my wife, my Duchess, and my companion in all life's adventures to come." The world seemed to still around them as Rosalind looked into the face of the man who had, against all expectations, breached the careful walls around her heart. In his eyes, she saw not just passion or temporary infatuation, but something deeper and more enduring, a recognition of her true self, an acceptance of all that she was, including the parts she had long hidden from the world. "Percy," she said, her voice tremulous with feeling, "are you certain? Once this step is taken, there can be no turning back. Society will." Society will adjust, as it always does, he interrupted gently. What matters is not their opinion, but our happiness. And I know, with a certainty I have rarely felt about anything else, that my happiness lies with you. He squeezed her hands lightly. The only question that remains is whether you believe your happiness lies with me. In that moment, all of Rosalind's doubts and fears seemed to fall away, leaving only the clear, bright certainty of her love for this extraordinary man. The path before them might not be entirely smooth. Society's acceptance would come gradually rather than immediately. But whatever challenges arose, they would face them together. Yes, she said, her voice growing stronger with conviction. Yes, Percy, I will marry you. I love you, and I would be honored to be your wife. Joy blazed in Percy's eyes as he rose, drawing her to her feet and into his arms. This second kiss was deeper than their first, a promise sealed with a passion that spoke of the life they would build together. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Percy rested his forehead against hers in a gesture of intimate connection. You have made me the happiest of men, he murmured. I shall spend my life ensuring you never regret your decision. Rosalind smiled, a happiness she had never expected to feel again radiating through her. I already know I won't, she assured him, for you have given me back something I thought lost forever, hope for a future filled with joy rather than merely endured with dignity. Percy kissed her once more, briefly but tenderly, before reluctantly stepping back to a more proper distance. I must speak to your cousin's husband tonight as your nearest male relation, he said, practicalities asserting themselves. And we should announce our engagement formally within the week before gossip outpaces us. So soon? Rosalind asked, though she found she had no real objection to haste. Unless you wish for a longer engagement, Percy inquired, suddenly concerned. We can wait, of course, if you prefer more time. Rosalind shook her head, smiling at his willingness to accommodate her wishes. No, I have no desire to wait. 5 years in society's shadows has been quite long enough. I find I am eager to begin our life together. The radiance of Percy's answering smile confirmed that she had made the right choice, not just in accepting his proposal, but in embracing the future it promised, challenges and all. As they drove back to Helena's house, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the London streets, Rosalind felt a sense of profound transformation. The woman who had entered the Duke of Westmoreland's life as a wallflower at a society ball just weeks ago was not the same woman who now wore his ring, slipped onto her finger just before they left the dower house, and carried his promise in her heart. That earlier Rosalind had been defined by loss and resignation, her identity shaped by forces beyond her control. This new Rosalind, the future Duchess of Westmoreland, would be defined by love freely given and received, by choices made from strength rather than fear. It was a change as profound as it was unexpected. Yet sitting beside Percy in his carriage, her hand clasped warmly in his, Rosalind knew with absolute certainty that it was right. Whatever society might whisper about the disgraced earl's daughter who had somehow captured a duke's heart, she would face it with the confidence of one who is truly seen and valued for herself. The future beckoned, bright with promise, and Rosalind Abernathy, soon to be Rosalind Trentham, Duchess of Westmoreland, stepped toward it without hesitation, leaving the shadows of the past finally and completely behind.